Hi, good morning everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the basic concepts in psychometry, that is one of the area called classification of psychological testing. So in the previous class we have already discussed about what are the different classification of psychological testing, and also we had gone through the one of the classification, that is the individual and group test. So in the upcoming slides we are going to discuss the remaining part that we have to discuss. Yes, here we have the different classification of the psychological testing, that is individual and group test, speed and power test, verbal and non-verbal test, and performance test, culture specific and culture free test, objective and subjective test. So these are all being based on some of the criteria. This classification is done based on some of the criteria. In the case of individual and group test, it is being classified on the basis of the criteria of administrative condition. So how it is being administered? So from that it is very clear that individual and group test, so that administration procedure is being uh, checked here, that is individual and group test. And the other test, it is based on some different criterias. Yes, the other one, that is the speed test and power test, it is also being done on the basis of the criteria of the time limit in producing the response. So it is being classified on the basis of the time limit. And the other things, that is a verbal and non-verbal performance and non-language test, and these all are being done under the criteria of the nature contents of the items in that test, or it is based on the content of the items in the psychological testing what we are going to be conduct. Yes, the other area or basis of the criteria of time limit in producing the response. The other classification for psychological test, that is on the basis of the response produced in the given time limit. So there are mainly two classification on the basis of a time limit, uh, that is the speed test and the power test. Yes, speed test. A speed test are designed to assess how quickly a test taker is able to complete the items within a set time period. The primary objective of speed test is to measure the person's ability to process information quickly and accurately. So from this we can easily understand that it is the main criteria behind of this classification, that is the time limit which is given to the uh, client, or which is given to the participant for making the responses. So here the primary objective of this test, that is a speed test, is to measure the person's ability to process information quickly and accurately for the given time. So how the person, to understand the person's ability to make the responses as much as possible in a given time limit, and it should be done, or the responses can be done in its accurate way. Yes, it is assessed, or it is designed to assess how quickly a test taker is able to complete the items within a set time period, or within a given time period. He is able to, or how easily or how quickly he can be complete that test or performance which is given. And they will be looking into the time limit for producing the responses, and it has a severe time limit, but all the items are comparatively easy, and the difficulties involved therein are more or less of the same degrees, and the items which are given or which are present in the test or in the speed test, which will be involving both easy and difficulties, in the same degree itself. Yes, when conducting the speed test, there is only very less chance, or there are only very few examinees are supposed to make the errors in the speed test, and it is being conducted, or it is being conducted to reveal how rapidly, that is with what speed, the examinees can respond within a given time limit. So here it is being understand, that is the ability of the person to respond, or how much is as possible he can respond to an item in the given time limit. So here they will be assessing the speed of the, yes, from the word itself we can understand that they will be assessing the speed of the examinees for responding to the items. And especially we can one of the example that we can see here, that some of the clerical aptitude tests belong to this category very much. Yes, the other test based on the time limit in producing the response, that is a power test. So a power test is one which has a generous time limit, so that the most examinees are able to attempt every items. So when comparing to the speed test, here in the case of a power test, there will be a generous time limit, so that examiners can able to attend or every items which are present in the test. And usually such tests have items which are generally arranged in increasing order of difficulties. So when comparing to speed test, we can see that in the speed test there will be every questions will have an specific pattern of illness, sorry, specific pattern of easiness and difficult. But in the case of a power test, usually the items in the test will be arranged in an increasing order of difficulties, that is moving from one item to the other one, automatically they will be feeling that it is getting into difficult items. So most of the intelligence test and aptitude test belong to the category of power test. For example, mainly in the case of aptitude test, you can see that in the first row or the first items will be feeling it will be easy, and moving into the other items the things will be getting complicated. In the case of aptitude test, as well as in the intelligence test also it is like that. In the starting area you will be feeling the items will be easy when comparing, then moving into the other areas or other items will be feeling moving into difficult area. So these tests, mainly intelligence and aptitude tests, are categorized in the power test area, and power tests demonstrate how much knowledge or information the examinees have. They'll be looking forward into how much knowledge or information the subject should have or the client is having. So that is why we can see that there is no, it is all based on the power test is mainly to assess the information or knowledge what the examiner is having, and this power test is mainly based on that. And the other area or the other criteria, the test is being classified on the criteria that according to the scope or applicability of the test. So in this case of scope, it is based on this criteria, that the scope of applicability of the test. And the first one is culture free or culture fair test, and the other one is culture specific test. So these are the two tests which is based on the criteria based on the scope of or applicability of the test. Yes, moving into the first one, that is the culture free or culture fair test. So here we can see that culture fair test is a test that is equally fair to all cultural groups. So from the word or from the heading itself, we can understand that it is culture free. The test will be culture free, or it will be very fair to every culture. The test will be very fair to every culture. So here you can see that cultural fair test is a test that is equally fair to all cultural groups, and fairness is related to a lack of bias in the interpretation or use of a test to classify or diagnose. So we can see that there will be very less bias can be done when this test has been conducted with every groups or every cultures, and it will be leading or no bias can be seen when classified the problems or when goes diagnosis, and the interpretation will not make any biases or lack of bias can be done. In a cultural fair test, the validity of the interpretation is similar across different cultural groups. So the validity will be existing with the cultural fair test. So when it is conducted, when this test is being conducted, the interpretation can be seen. Validity of the interpretation is similar across different cultural groups. So with every culture or with different cultures, the validity will be existing in the case of cultural fair test. So in cultural free test, avoiding culturally loaded items that are found to be unfair to certain groups of people increases the likelihood of it being a culturally fair test. So here in the case of a culture free test, we can see the avoidance of culturally loaded items. That is, no items can be given any specific role for any of the culture or any of the cultural norms, and item that is found to be unfair to certain groups of people and increases the likelihood of it being a culturally fair test. And some of the example we can mention, as like in the previous one, we can see that Raven's progressive matrices. So it is globally accepted, or there is no it is not specified, or this test is not specified for any of the single culture. So across the globe, across the different cultures, this test can be done, and it is culture free also, and it is culture fair. So one of the example, that is Raven's progressive matrices, okay, or SPM, standard progressive matrices. This test can be feel it as a cultural free test. The other one is culture specific test. So from that word we can understand that how it goes, how this test will be done. And culture specific test, these type of tests are designed for a specific population and show biased result for a specific group, culture and population due to cultural influences. And a particular population influenced by cultural elements display either low or high scores relative to the test norms. Yes, it is also specified for a specific culture. This test is only specified for some of the only one culture or a specific culture, and it also shows biased result for a specific group of or culture and population due to cultural influence, and it also shows some of the biases when any cultural influences will be affecting the items or to the subject. So when it is being conducted, there is a chance for making biases when the cultural influence happened, and a particular population influenced by cultural elements display either low or high scores relative to the test norms. And the same thing, that if it is any of the cultural elements has been influenced for the population or the sample of that test, it will they will also display a high or low scores and relating to the norms of the test. So this can also be happen due to cultural specific test.